Hi everyone, and welcome to Hauntora. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is the place where we explore the darkest, most deeply unsettling, true horror stories the internet has to offer. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Genuinely glad you're here. I'll be straight with you. This one took me a while to put together. Not because of the research, but because once I read these stories, I found myself thinking about them at weird hours, on a drive, right before sleep. The kind of thing that just quietly lodges itself somewhere in the back of your mind and doesn't move. I don't have a lot to say up front tonight, just that I'm grateful. For real. The comments, the messages, the people who share these videos with someone at midnight because they need another person in the room, that means something to me, more than I usually say. Links are at the top of the description, always will be. 2 stories tonight. The first one will ease you in. The second one, I'll let it speak for itself. I'll just say that some stories don't disturb you because they're graphic. They disturb you because they're quiet and familiar and could have happened to almost anyone. That's the kind we're dealing with tonight. When it's over, come down to the comments. I read them. Everyone. Okay, lights down. Get comfortable. Let's get into it. Viewer discretion is advised. I've been making true crime content for about 6 years. Started as a hobby, turned into something I could actually live off. Nothing glamorous, just me, a decent microphone, and a genuine obsession with how ordinary people end up doing extraordinary, terrible things. I'm methodical by nature. I was an audio engineer before I pivoted to podcasting, so I think in terms of signal chains and room acoustics and post-production cleanup. I don't spook easily. I say that not to sound tough, but because it matters for what I'm about to tell you. It matters that you understand who I am before you understand what happened at that cabin. I found the rental on a short-let site. 3 nights mid-October, a place listed as a writer's retreat, about 40 minutes off the main highway, through a stretch of state forest in the rural southeast. No neighbors visible on the satellite view. The listing said the nearest gas station was 18 miles out. That was the point. I was recording a solo episode about a case from the 1970s. A missing family, a rural property, evidence that was never properly processed. And I wanted the acoustics of genuine isolation. Carpeted walls and foam panels are fine for most things, but there's a texture to silence in a real forest that you simply cannot fake. I'd done it before at other rentals. It always made the audio richer, more present. I arrived late afternoon on a Thursday. The key was in a lockbox on the porch, code provided by the owner via text. The cabin was small, 1 main room with a kitchenette along the back wall, a bathroom, and a sleeping loft above. Pine-paneled walls, a wood stove that I didn't plan to use. The furniture was sparse and mismatched in the way that cheap rentals always are. A plaid couch, a folding table, a standing lamp with a slightly crooked shade. It smelled of must and something faintly mineral, like well water or old pipes. Nothing alarming, just the smell of a place that had been closed up for a while. I set up my recording rig on the folding table, ran a level check, and started cooking. I remember thinking it was a good space, good quiet. The forest outside was doing exactly what I needed it to do, just sitting there, heavy and dark and indifferent. I ate, went over my notes, and went to sleep reasonably early. I was there to work. I noticed the chair the next morning. It was a wooden chair, ladder-back style, that had been sitting against the far wall when I arrived. I'd registered it without really looking at it, but when I came down from the loft on Friday, it was positioned differently, angled slightly toward the room, rather than flush against the wall. I stood there in my socks, looking at it for a moment, then decided I must have bumped it the night before without noticing, or that the uneven floorboards had shifted it gradually. Old cabins do things like that. I pushed it back against the wall and made coffee. I recorded for most of Friday. It went well. Long, clean takes, the forest holding its silence outside the window. No aircraft, no road noise. Around 9 in the evening, I stopped for a break and plugged in my headphones to review a section from mid-afternoon, a passage I'd stumbled over and wanted to redo. I was about 4 minutes into the playback when I heard it. Under my voice, beneath it, almost behind it, the way a sound can seem to come from inside the material of a recording rather than the room around you. A breath, then something shaped like a word. I stopped the playback and sat very still. I told myself it was bleed from outside. A passing vehicle, a bird, wind moving through a gap in the window frame, and the microphone picking up resonance in the walls. I have enough audio experience to know that rooms do strange things, especially old rooms, especially at night. I went back further in the recording, an hour earlier. I almost missed it. It was so quiet, so carefully, underneath everything else, but it was there. A sound, rhythmic, patient, almost like someone pacing very slowly, timing each footfall to land between my own movements, in the pauses between my sentences. I put the headphones down. The room was exactly as it had been. The lamp in the corner, the plaid couch, the crooked shade, the wooden chair, which I now noticed had moved again, 6 inches from the wall, facing inward. My chest went cold, not my blood. My chest, the physical center of me. I did not move. I looked at the loft ladder. I looked at the bathroom door, which was standing open. I looked at the kitchenette. I looked at the front door and calculated the number of steps. I thought about whether I had seen anything under the loft when I came down that morning. I thought about the fact that the loft had a deep overhang with a full shadow. I thought about the wood stove. I thought about the gap behind the couch. I picked up my phone and my keys. I did not pick up my recording equipment. I walked to the front door at a pace that I cannot entirely explain. Not slow, not running, just direct, the way you walk when you've decided something and your body is already executing before your mind has fully caught up. I opened the door, went down the porch steps, got in my car, and reversed down the dirt track to the road without turning the headlights on until I was moving. I drove to the gas station 18 miles out. I called the county sheriff from the parking lot. They sent 2 deputies who arrived at the cabin about 40 minutes later. I waited in the gas station. I bought a coffee I didn't drink. One deputy called me back an hour after they had arrived. He said the cabin was clear, no one inside. But he said it in a way that had a slight pause before the second sentence, and I've thought about that pause a lot since. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that there was a space beneath the loft, behind a false panel in the back wall, that the deputies had found, a crawl space of sorts. Large enough for a person. There was a sleeping bag in there, a water bottle, a small cache of food in sealed bags. Someone had been staying there, before me or alongside me or both. The owner of the cabin claimed to have no knowledge of any of it. The deputies said the evidence suggested the space had been occupied recently, but there was no way to establish exactly when, or for how long, or by whom. The case was logged. I was told someone would follow up. No one has. I still have the audio files. I've listened to them twice since then, which is twice more than I should have. The sound is clearest in the earliest recording. The first take I did Friday morning, not long after I pushed the chair back against the wall and told myself I was being irrational. You can hear me talking, and underneath it, if you know to listen for it, you can hear him, just breathing, steady and slow, waiting to find out how long it would take me to notice he was there. He had been waiting longer than I ever would have. I've always been the kind of person who needs a reason for things, not in a spiritual sense, more like I need the wiring to make sense before I'll accept that something's broken. I was an electrician for 6 years. Before that, 2 years of civil engineering before I dropped out. I say this because it matters. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I'm someone who looks for the source. So when I saw the listing tease unpaid field work, land survey assist, no experience necessary, 3 days in a national forest, 800 cash, I read it twice and applied the same day. I'd been between jobs for about 5 weeks at that point. The listing was vague, sure, posted on one of those general labor boards, the kind cluttered with moving gigs and furniture assembly. But the pay was real. The contact responded within an hour, and the instructions were clear enough. Meet at a specific trailhead parking lot at 6 a.m. Bring your own boots. Everything else provided. I told my roommate where I was going. I screenshotted the listing. I'm telling you this so you understand, I wasn't careless. I did what a reasonable person does. The morning was cold in that early autumn way, the kind of cold that hasn't committed yet, where you can feel the warmth underneath it trying to hold on. 2 men were already at the trailhead when I pulled in. the one who introduced himself as the lead, I'll call him Garrett, though I never saw ID, was maybe mid-40s, calm, the kind of calm that looks practiced. He had a clipboard and a bright orange vest, and he smiled like someone who gives orientations for a living. The other man, shorter, darker jacket, was loading gear from a truck bed. Garrett introduced him as his field assistant. The man nodded once but didn't speak, didn't make eye contact. I assumed he was just quiet. Some people are. Garrett walked me through the day. We were marking boundary lines for a timber access review. Routine stuff, he said. We'd use GPS units to log coordinates, flag certain landmarks, move along. He handed me a unit. I turned it on. It blinked and held a loading screen. I looked up to mention it, and he was already talking about boot terrain and weather windows. I figured I'd troubleshoot it once we started walking. We were maybe 40 minutes in when I tried the GPS again, still loading. I looked over at Garrett's unit, clipped to his vest. The screen was dark, not loading, off. I glanced at the third man. His was in his jacket pocket, and when he shifted his weight crossing a stream bed, I caught the screen, off. I told myself the units were old. Cheap equipment, government surplus, probably had firmware issues. That's the thing about rationalization. It doesn't feel like denial while you're doing it. It feels like good sense. An hour later, Garrett steered us away from a ridge line. Not dramatically, yet he just said the flagging was lower and moved ahead without discussion. But I'd been watching the topography, and that ridge was the highest point in maybe 2 miles. I'd had 1 bar of service in the parking lot. I hadn't had anything since. That ridge was the only place I was going to get it again, and we were walking away from it with no explanation. I kept moving. I kept watching. The third man still hadn't said a word. Not to me, not to Garrett. Garrett would occasionally speak to him, short directives, flag the post, mark that edge, and the man would comply without acknowledgement. No nod, no grunt. At one point, I walked beside him for a full 10 minutes on a flat stretch, and I tried twice to make small talk. Not even conversation, just noise. He looked straight ahead both times like I hadn't made a sound. We stopped for a water break around midday, and I set my pack down and reached inside for my thermos. My hand touched paper. I thought it was the equipment waiver Garrett had handed me that morning, the one I'd folded and tucked away. I pulled it out. It wasn't the waiver. It was a topographic map, folded in quarters, standard Forest Service style. I unfolded it slowly, and the first thing I registered was that there were no coordinates printed, no elevation markers, no trail designations. The contour lines were there, the terrain was there, but everything identifying had been removed. And in the center of the map, written in black pen, was my full name, first and last. In handwriting I didn't recognize. I refolded it, I put it back. I took a long drink from my thermos, and I sat there and I thought about what I was willing to accept. I thought about how far we were from the trailhead. I thought about the direction we'd come and whether I could retrace it alone. I thought about what it would mean to be wrong, to cause a scene, to accuse these 2 men of something I couldn't articulate, and have a perfectly boring explanation surface that made me look paranoid. I sat with that fear longer than I should have. The fear of being embarrassed outlasted the fear of being in danger for longer than I'd like to admit. Then I thought about the ridge. I stood up and said I needed to use the bathroom and walked into the trees. And then I didn't stop walking. I changed direction twice. I moved uphill whenever I could. I didn't run. Running makes noise. Running is panic, and panic gets you caught or gets you hurt. I moved fast and quiet, and I kept my breathing low when I counted my steps to manage the fear in my chest that was trying to become something I couldn't control. I hit the ridge in 22 minutes, 1 bar. I called 911, and I kept moving while I talked. I gave the dispatcher my name and the trailhead parking lot, and I told her I needed someone there. I didn't explain. I just said I needed someone there, and I kept moving. I made it back to the parking lot in just under 2 hours. A sheriff's deputy was already waiting. I told him everything. He took my statement, photographed the map, and drove out to the trailhead access road. Garrett's truck was gone. The third man's vehicle, a gray sedan I'd barely registered that morning, was gone too. The listing was taken down before I got home. The phone number Garrett had used to confirm my hire was disconnected by that evening. The deputy called me 3 days later to say they'd found no match for either man in the area, no record of a permitted survey operation in that section of forest, and no other reports filed. He used the phrase, persons of interest, in a tone that suggested they didn't expect to find them. I still don't know what the job was supposed to be. I know what it wasn't. The map is in a plastic bag in my desk drawer, and sometimes I take it out and look at my name in the middle of all those unmarked contour lines. And I think about how much planning it takes to make someone disappear somewhere no one's looking.